In this lesson, we're going to go over strict liability in torts for abnormally dangerous activities. Here we say when a defendant engages in an abnormally dangerous activity, the defendant may be held strictly liable for harm resulting from the activity, even when the defendant exercised all possible care to prevent the harm from occurring. So the first thing to recognize here when we're trying to determine whether a defendant is strictly liable, the first thing we should consider is that in no part of this analysis are we going to consider whether the defendant acted reasonably, whether the defendant took the appropriate precautions, did the defendant exercise care, was the defendant well-intentioned. None of this stuff is relevant in an analysis of strict liability. Basically, if the requirements are satisfied, the defendant is liable. That is the definition of strict liability. We're going to have requirements. If the defendant meets those requirements, he's liable. It doesn't matter if he exercised all the care in the world to prevent the harm. Our defendant could have taken every possible precaution to prevent harm. He is going to be liable if all of our requirements are met. This is very different from things like intentional torts and negligence. We know in intentional torts, for the defendant to be liable, he's going to have some sort of specific or general intent. And we know in negligence, to be liable, the defendant's going to have to breach a standard of care owed to the plaintiff, right? His conduct is going to have to fall below a certain standard of care to be held liable. In other words, the defendant has to, in some way, be at fault in those cases to be held liable. As we moved to strict liability analyses, when we're trying to decide whether a defendant is strictly liable, it doesn't matter how careful he was, how well-intentioned he was, how many precautions he took. This is not a part of the analysis. The defendant can be held liable even if he was not at fault, even if he did everything quote-unquote right. He exercised all possible care. If our requirements are met, he's going to be held liable. This is really important to recognize in a strict liability analysis because a lot of times in torts fact patterns, our defendant is going to be painted as a person who's exercising reasonable care, who's taking all the precautions. And that's kind of like a red herring in our analysis. It's not relevant in determining strict liability. Of course, that would be relevant in a negligence analysis, but not in a strict liability analysis. Okay, so that's the first thing to recognize here. The next is, okay, well, if a defendant is engaging in an abnormally dangerous activity and someone is injured as a result of this, he can be held strictly liable. Well, what is an abnormally dangerous activity? We have to define this. To define it, we look at the second restatement of torts, section 520, and we see the following factors are considered to determine whether an activity is abnormally dangerous, and we get 6 factors. We can break each one of these down kind of one by one, starting with our first 2 factors. Number 1, we need to have the existence of a high degree of risk of some harm to the person, land, or chattels of others, and we need the likelihood that the harm that results from it will be great. These are our first 2 factors. They kind of go hand in hand. So the thing to recognize here is what we're looking for when we're trying to find an abnormally dangerous activity. We're looking for something where if it goes wrong, if something happens, the magnitude of harm is going to be really great. Consider if I am, slicing some onions. Say I'm like chopping onions. I got my little cutting board, I got an onion, and I'm chopping it. Okay, is this activity abnormally dangerous? Well, obviously not. Okay, there's not a likelihood that the harm that's going to result from chopping onions is going to be great. We don't have a high degree of risk of some harm to people, land, or chattels of others. If I'm sitting here chopping an onion, chances are, the worst case scenario, if we think of like, what's the worst thing, I could cut my finger. I guess if I'm using a really sharp knife, I could like chop the nub of my tip of my finger off or something, but that would be really rare. This is not an activity that we're going to think about as abnormally dangerous, just like chopping up some onions. Okay, so what does it take to get to abnormally dangerous? Well, the acronym a lot of times I think about, especially with these first two kind of factors, is REC. Right? Anytime we see a defendant who is handling radioactive materials, is dealing with explosives, things like dynamite, TNT, or we have a defendant who is handling ultra-hazardous chemicals, right? Chemicals that are really harmful to human beings. Of the dozens of cases I've read about abnormally dangerous activities, almost all of them can fit within one of these categories. Again, we have a defendant who's using or handling radioactive materials. We have a defendant who is handling or using explosives, things like dynamite, TNT, or we have a defendant who is handling some sort of chemical that's really hazardous to human beings. These are things that are going to have an existence of a high degree of risk of some harm to people, land, or chattels of others, and the likelihood that the harm that results from these activities, basically from handling radioactive materials, from using explosive devices, or using chemicals that are really hazardous to human beings, right? The likelihood that the harm is going to result from those activities is going to be great in most cases. So these are the big three. Of course, that's not all encompassing, but again, of like the dozens of cases I've read, usually it does involve one of these three. With radioactivity, a lot of times you see like storage or transportation of radioactive materials, but also just the use of atomic energy or nuclear power. Think like Chernobyl, right? If something goes wrong, it goes really wrong if you're operating a nuclear power plant. You know, if something blows up, a lot of people can die, and like the land is now going to be inhabitable by human beings for like thousands of years because of the radioactivity. So radioactive materials, again, can fall within this. Also explosive devices. So a lot of times this would be like demolition operations where, you know, you want to take a building down. So a company goes in and they put explosive devices in, they detonate it, the building falls down. Also, though, what you'll see the court sometimes refer to as blasting operations, which involves typically like drilling holes in the ground, and then, you know, the company puts dynamite in those holes, detonates it, and the goal here is to like loosen usually the rock underneath the ground for some sort of activity. Maybe they want to drill an oil well and they need to loosen the ground or something, so they drill these holes and they put dynamite in, blow them up. Right, but anything that involves explosive devices. Also just storing or like transporting explosive devices, right? Like if you're just the manufacturer of dynamite and you're storing like 1,000 pounds of explosives somewhere, right? That could be within our kind of category here of abnormally dangerous activities. And of course, chemicals that are ultra hazardous to human beings. You know, these are always chemicals that have like a really long name that's hard to pronounce, but you'll have some expert witness that comes to the stand and is like, oh yeah, if you breathe like a nanogram of this, it'll kill you, right? Well, if you're dealing with chemicals like that, obviously we can see how there's existence of a high degree of risk of some harm to people, land, or chattels, and the likelihood that the harm that results from it will be great. So these are the big three I would look out for when we're issue spotting this. Of course, just because a defendant is engaged in one of these things, you know, handling radioactive materials, using explosive devices, dealing with ultra-hazardous chemicals, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be strictly liable for engaging in an abnormally dangerous activity. We have to go through all of our factors, some of our common law requirements to make that determination. But it kind of just, it's our issue spotting, right? It's what we're looking for. Activities kind of like this, at least are what the court's going to say satisfy these first two factors, or at least are indicative of abnormally dangerous activities. Okay, so let's go to our third factor, okay? The inability to eliminate the risk by the exercise of reasonable care. Okay, so the idea here is potentially any activity can become extremely dangerous if you're being negligent. Go back to me chopping onions. Okay, if I'm chopping onions and I'm exercising reasonable care as I do it, the risk of harm is really low. But let's say I decide to put on a blindfold and I take a chainsaw and I'm like, I'm gonna chop my onions like this. So I'm like blindfolded and I've got a chainsaw and there's a lot of people around me and I'm trying to chop my onions with this chainsaw. Okay, well, I've just taken a task that's relatively not dangerous and made it extremely dangerous. So in that case, I'm absolutely breaching the standard of care I owe to those around me. I'm being negligent, but I'm still chopping onions. And chopping onions is not inherently an abnormally dangerous activity, because chopping onions, I have the ability to eliminate the risk of harm by exercising reasonable care. So this is why we would say in that case, I'm not strictly liable for engaging in an abnormally dangerous activity, because chopping onions, the risk of harm here can be eliminated by simply exercising reasonable care. Okay, the idea is with this third factor, almost anything can be made into a really dangerous activity if you're being really reckless, really negligent. And that's not what's being considered by the courts in this analysis. We're looking for things that are inherently dangerous. Things like radioactive materials, explosive devices, ultra-hazardous chemicals. These things are inherently dangerous. There's an inherent danger anytime you're dealing with these things. Very different than chopping onions. You can't really, even if you're exercising a lot of care, you can't eliminate all the risk with radioactive materials, explosives, and ultra-hazardous chemicals, right? It's at least difficult, more difficult to eliminate the risk by exercising reasonable care than would be the case if you're like chopping onions. Okay, so that's kind of your third factor you want to look out for. Your next factor is the extent to which the activity is not a matter of common usage. Important to recognize here. Thank you so much for watching this video preview of our Legal Education Accelerator Program, or LEAP for short. If you would like to see the conclusion of this video and gain full access to our entire 1L and 2L video library, integrated outlines, streamable audio versions, additional practice exams with explanations, and much more, we invite you to head over to our website and join the thousands of law students who have already enrolled. To get started with your no-risk free trial today, simply click the link in the description box below or visit www.studicata.com/leap.
Hi everyone, my name is Serena and I'm currently a law student at South Texas College of Law, Houston.
Hi everybody, my name is Shiva and I'm currently a law student at Southwestern.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and I am a first year student at South Texas College of Law, Houston. I used the Studicata study video series last semester to help me prepare mostly for contracts, and I actually made an A+ in contracts last semester, which I greatly dedicate to the Studicata videos.
By using Studicata to help me prepare for my final exam, I was able to score the highest grade out of my class on the final and even have my essay distributed as the model answer. Not to mention I had done quite poorly on the midterm and was struggling throughout the whole course of the semester, understanding the material and keeping up with lectures.
Because of the Studicata video lectures, I was able to go into my exams with a feeling of confidence. I didn't have to worry about what the rules of law were or how I was going to organize my answer to an essay question.
I would absolutely recommend the Studicata series and their online course materials to anyone. I think that they are not like professor lectures that you might find online or other outside study materials that you may encounter. I think that the Studicata videos really focus on not only ensuring that you understand the material that you're going to encounter on your final, but they also help you to understand kind of the best method for test taking, and they really break down how to approach each problem and the best ways to tackle certain methods on testing, and I think that's really important, and I think it's really special. I don't see that anywhere else in any of the other online resources that I've found. So I would certainly recommend Studicata to anyone who is studying in law school right now. Good luck on your studying, and you're going to do great.
I would definitely recommend Studicata to anybody watching this video. Give it a chance. I'm positive that you will love it, that you will get a lot out of it, and that you will be happy that you gave it a chance. I definitely am. I know I will be using Studicata in the future.
And I cannot thank Studicata enough for getting me through my first semester of law school. I will definitely continue to watch the Studicata video lectures throughout my law school career, and I highly recommend that any future or current law student do the same.